Hi, this is Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and this is another Monday night, so welcome to Uncivil Disobedience. I hate it when I can't talk. Joining me, as always, is my partner in crime, Kennedy Cooper, and since I haven't actually met our guest before, I will let Kennedy introduce us.
We've got John Leavitt with us. John is a writer, a New York rapscallion, one of my favorite grifters. You draw sometimes, right?
I've been known to. People have accused me of drawing. And I'm not a grifter. I'm married now. I sealed that bag.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't make it sound like you're a lousy unwed grifter like you used to be. You're a respectable man now.
Respectable. That's what marriage is, turning grifting into respectability.
Well, I'm a reader, and one of the things I remember from reading Emma is the line, "I'm an old married man, and old married men have no time for whatever fun thing he had been asked to do."
Well, knowing Austin, it was probably, beat a peasant or a goose.
Dancing was the first one.
Dance with your horse. That was,
Dance with your horse is more PG Wodehouse.
I guess that's true.
That's definitely a very Jeeves and Wooster approach to dancing.
Yeah. Well, you know what I always say? You have to buy your wife at least as much jewelry as you buy your horse, okay? Otherwise,
minimum.
You got a problem.
Unless you're some sort of Circassian warrior nomad, but I think even those guys have settled down these days.
Yeah, they just throw like an entire hemp bush into the wildfire and inhale deeply, and then they're fine.
That sounds all right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Though not hemp. Hemp has been neutralized. But yes. Something.
So, let's talk about a different group of roaming people. Because, John, you proposed that we have a discussion about gig workers, especially delivery folks in New York, although I think there is definitely a wider conversation to be had just about the nature of delivery work in general. And I think we should get into this because we need to talk more about the way that these apps are just blatantly abusing people, and this whole system is like a sort of racketeering. I don't even know. It's like it's a Ponzi scheme or something. It doesn't even make sense. It's all going to fall apart anyway. But the people are being chewed up while we wait to see what happens. And yeah, it's pretty unfortunate.
It's musical chairs. The Wall Street's musical chairs, where whoever gets stuck with the company when the bottom falls out loses.
Right.
Yeah, it's all an attempt to recreate like Uber's success, which was like a one-off hothouse Hail Mary kind of thing, which wasn't even really a success because the company has never made money. But this is the morbid symptoms of there being so much money at the top. There's no way to invest in anything that can't beat inflation.
It's always worth pointing out that somehow Jeff Bezos became a billionaire before Amazon ever started making a profit.
Mm-hmm. And Twitter's the same thing,
Yeah,
right,
it's almost like the collective force of monopolization is more important than profit.
Almost.
Yeah.
It's also, and with tech, you can never decide how much of this is really what it's about.
Oh yeah, no number like attached to any streaming service is real.
Yeah.
Or any online thing. As far as I can tell, you can easily say that nobody has ever watched anything on Amazon. That's how much evidence there is for these things.
Yeah. Netflix is the most honest one by just generally releasing no information.
Yeah, no, and even Amazon is like telling people in its quarterly report. I'm sorry, I hate for this to become like macroeconomics hour because I gave myself an economics degree to own people on Twitter. But
No,
but
it's
like
great.
no, but it's like even Netflix is like, okay, you may have been hearing some bad things about how we're not a real company and don't make money. We assure you that's all wrong. Because like everything these companies do, they're not. This is the morbid symptom we live in. Nothing is customer focused. Everything is investor focused because customers don't have money. Of course we don't. Investors have money. So like you buy up all these properties and you buy up all like these directors and these actors. So you can say in an investor and I said that correctly, thing that like, oh, well, we have these directors and these actors, therefore we must be a real company. And like, it's all Lyle Langley shit.
It sounds like a Potemkin corporation.
Yeah, and they're all Potemkin corporations. Like they're all like 1/4 of all businesses, I believe, in the UK are like zombie corporations. If they can't just like refinance their loans every year, they would just cease to exist.
So
it's not just the structure; it's also like the culture itself around corporations has become increasingly unaccountable compared to the past, where you don't even know who these people are a lot of the time that you're trying to talk to or work with. There's no real understanding of like who your boss is. A lot of times, like you've never met your manager at a lot of jobs these days. Like it's just like that. It's increasingly disconnected. Just like here's an email telling you you're fired.
I read something somewhere describing it as being like a phantom boss who's around when you need to get in trouble, but is never around when you need to ask for an advance.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, no, that's from the article I linked to in curbed.com called The Revolt of the Delivery Workers. Because there are 65,000 delivery workers in New York City. They're being hassled by cops. They're being exploited by the apps. They're being like very frequently robbed.
Yeah.
So like they're forming what is essentially like mutual aid groups, like locations where they can charge the batteries to their electric scooters and bikes, and places where they can get food, and sort of like begin bottom up organizing. And speaking of Phantom Boss, there are 2 paragraphs I would like to read from this Curbed article, which I recommend everyone read. It's a very good list of grievances.
Yeah, really good article.
It goes like this. The main reason restaurants weren't already letting you order a single bacon, egg, and cheese from 50 blocks away for almost no charge is that it's a terrible business model. Expensive, wasteful, labor-intensive. You would lose money on every order. The apps promised to solve this problem through algorithmic optimization and scale. This has yet to happen. None of the companies are consistently profitable, but for a while, they solved this problem with money. Armed with billions in venture capital, the apps subsidized what had been a low-margin side gig of the restaurant industry until it resembled any other Silicon Valley consumer gratification machine. Seamless, which merged with Grubhub and provided its own gig platform to complete, was particularly direct in its pitch to investors, running cutesy Subway ads about ordering delivery with 0 human contact and requesting entrees for your hamster. The apps failed and bought each other out, and now only 3 remain: DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Grubhub Seamless. Each divides New York City into more or less equally, and each uses the piecework model pioneered by Uber itself. Workers get paid when they accept and complete a delivery, and a game-like system of rewards and penalties keeps them moving. High scores for being on time, low scores and fewer orders for tardiness, and so on. Chavaz and the others call it the Patron Fantamisa, the Phantom Boss, always watching and quick to punish you for being late, but nowhere to be found when you need $10 to fix your bike or when you get doored and have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, that's exactly it, you know? And there really is, I mean, I know people who work these apps. There really is it's so hard to get any accountability. I mean, think about like your worst company that you have to deal with on a regular basis for customer service, where you're just waiting and waiting and hoping to talk to somebody, and it's worse than that.
My wife drove for Grubhub, so I mean, there's nobody to talk to. It's not just a matter of not knowing who to talk to. There's no one to talk to. The app tells you what to do and gives you good or bad news, and that's your experience.
You hear this all the time from discussions with gig workers about how the process is entirely opaque and everyone's trying to like optimize the system in order to get what is just like enough hours to get paid to live on, and you're constantly having to like trick it and figuring it out. It reminds me a lot of how casinos operate, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of the goal is to keep the other workers, these sort of faceless competitors that you don't know, but you know that you need to compete with. And like, again, this extends even further, like the corporate culture of don't talk about your wages, don't talk about your exact responsibilities, like things of that nature. We're taking that even further now. Now you don't even know when you're looking at other cars on the road, which ones of them are your coworkers or not. Unless
here's
you
the thing.
do something like this.
Here's the thing. How sick is it to have a model where all of your coworkers are your competitors who you're trying to continuously outperform in order to maintain a baseline subsistence level income?
And here's the thing that gets me is that that's so inefficient. Like, there's a reason these companies have never posed a profit, is because internal competition is dumb and stupid and for babies. Like, that's what that guy who tried to run Sears did, like make every department compete against each other. Like, no, what you want is, I hate to use a business term, what you want is vertical integration and internal cooperation so that resources can be shared among an organization to make it more efficient. Your model should be the beehive, not that everyone is working, but that 1/3 of people are at rest at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I worked at Sears when I was not long out of high school before they went under. And I can tell you, it was a shit show. One of the worst run companies I've ever seen. They focused almost all of their efforts on loss prevention. And they definitely turned a lot of that inward. And also, they were when you talk about this like competition that doesn't make sense, literally, they're like telling these departments like, oh, you're in the appliance department. Your department did less than women's clothes last month. What are you going to do to bump that up? Like, what relationship does that have?
No, it's like, what if the world was made of pudding? Like that's the level you're asking here. And like Sears is like an especially egregious example of how American capitalists have become idiots.
And well, let's be honest. There was also a great deal of naked, corrupt theft in that whole Sears thing.
Oh yeah, no, it's either like thievery or idiocy,
or both at the same time.
Yeah, you can be both. That's the venture capitalist model. It's like strip the copper out of the economy. And right now we're all just burning down the country for the insurance money, except we've also burned down the insurance company. So I don't know how that's going to work.
And all you need to correct yourself of any illusions that these billionaires are geniuses is to listen to them talk for even a short amount of time.
Or not even talk, like the billionaires inbox over at what used to be the Decider. Like, they got Ricketts, the family that basically runs Indiana like a fiefdom. They got all their emails, and they sound like deranged, COVID crazy Fox News grandpas, and you realize, holy shit, these people literally believe it when they say like Obama is a Muslim, communist, gay Soviet. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
So,
they sound like Power Rangers villains.
The most powerful thing about fascism, and yes, I will do the thing that I've been doing for several shows, which is to piss everybody off so much that the guest can't possibly piss anyone off. And and say that yes, the Republicans are fascists and so are a lot of the Democrats. But this whole idea of fascism lying so ineptly that the only people who believe it are the fascists themselves has really come true in a lot of ways with the Republican Party. They totally believe their own lies, and no one who isn't in on it believes it at all.
No, anyone with any smarts has kind of like gotten out of the game because they realize what's happening. And it's very similar to, I forget when it was, but there was a study on email scams.
Yes.
And they found that what was most effective were the scams were very obviously scams. Like anyone with half a brain could figure it out that this was not going to work, because that meant, because there's no cost to running an email scam, like it doesn't cost anything to send out 10,000 emails. If you find one or two people who are dumb enough to fall for that, they will fall for it and believe it to the end. Like you don't have to work them. Like you don't have to long con them. They're easy marks. And that's kind of what the internet and what the Republican system has been, to identify and enhance easy marks because it's less work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to enhance the value of their votes through voter suppression. And
the Democrats have really been trying to cultivate that easy mark status among Democrats in competition. And
they desperately want it as well.
And Democratic Party voters appear to be cooperating in the sense that concentration camps are now temporary migrant holding facilities.
Well, what they primarily want is what most people want, which is not to think about politics. So if you can create a situation where you don't have to think about it, well, then you'll win. I did want to slightly cycle back to Sears and how capitalists are dumb.
Yes.
Because
always
Sears had everything it had on hand in the late 80s to become Amazon. And it threw it all away. They had their own credit card. They had their own internet service.
Yes.
They had their own reputation as a solid catalog. Like buying through mail and buying through the internet is not that different an experience.
Nope. They had their own line of appliances that were considered reliable and trustworthy.
That you could return. They had built 100 years of trust.
Yeah.
And they threw it away because in the 80s, the first generation of people who hadn't come up through Sears by being shop clerks or being people in the industry, but who had come to the company, by being MBA people.
Yes.
People who are taught economics in college, which is basically being taught how to cheerlead for fake ideas.
Well, so let's be clear. Let's differentiate between the MBA, which is business administration, the accountants, and the economists. The accountants are following real principles in theory, because there really is actually a principle behind not spending more money than you have in normal people's accounting. Different rules for rich people, but that's a whole nother matter.
I think there's a reason why a lot of accountants I know are secretly Marxists.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Because they actually have to deal with money all day and they're like, oh, this is bad.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got the economists. And as someone who spent time in the late David Graeber's threads owning econ PhDs, I have to agree with the position in debt that most of economics is imaginary, and the things that are supposed to be true are completely wrong.
Yeah, there's a reason they keep the economics classes very far away from the business classes.
Yeah, no kidding.
Well, there's also a reason that they keep the economics classes very far away from the anthropology classes, which is that the actual historical record debunks everything economics says about the history of economics. It turns out barter wasn't actually a thing. For
let's
instance.
assume though for a minute that an economics degree isn't worthless at face value. We'll pretend for a second that it's not worthless at face value, even though we know that it is. Okay, so wink, wink. An economics degree. Let's imagine that it could be okay. Here's the thing: academia creates shitty people.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say it. Okay, I'm tired of dealing with this bullshit, and I have no patience to just be nice about it anymore. Academia creates really crummy, pretentious people who have spent 4 to 6 years inside a building and think that they can come talk to somebody who has been doing an actual job and tell them more about that job than that person knows, even if they've been doing that job for 30 years. Like, and when economists, you hire these young economists who are the sons of like your millionaire friends who are calling you up and saying, hey, give my son a cushy job at your company. And so the CEO of Sears says, okay, I'll give your son, he got an economics degree. Okay. He can help do some middle management planning of shit. Well, then that guy comes in, he knows nothing about anything. He's got his head straight up his ass. And he starts thinking, well, what I learned in school was squeeze the profit out of everything like blood from a stone. And that's what happens next.
Well, the scariest thing about capitalist economics is everything ever written by an economist named James Buchanan.
Mm-hmm.
Starting with, now I have to remember it, starting with the guy Carter appointed, every single Fed chair has been a believer in James Buchanan economics.
Yeah, and it's entirely psychotic because there's never any future in capitalist economics. Like there's no investing. This is why, like, I have a very typical line. There are no liberals in America, because if you were, as we consider it, like an economic liberal, you would support things like large social safety nets and like just giving people money because we're a consumer-based economy and that's how things work.
Yeah, you support actual economic development.
Giving money to consumers would mean consumers would buy things.
Yeah,
and consumers buying things is what makes a consumer economy function.
Right, and like, do I think we should be a consumer-based economy? Like, no, it's obviously killing the planet, but I know the system as it exists. What we have now are market fundamentalists.
Even Andrew Yang knew that. Give people money and they'll spend it.
Right. And that's why there are no liberals, because everyone is swept up in this market fundamentalist worldview where there is no future because there's only the next quarter statement.
Right.
So therefore you can never do investment.
But ironically,
you can never have things pay off.
Ironically, the guy who created that sort of no more, don't think about the future worldview was arguing for liberalism. John Maynard Keynes was arguing about.
Oh God.
Yeah.
He was arguing about why we could afford deficit spending during a depression and how you pay it off with taxes when the economy gets better. But in the long run, that means more interest. And Keynes holds up his hand and waves his finger. No. In the long run, we're dead. And that was his argument for the New Deal, basically, and for the post-World War II explosion of the social safety net in the UK. But now it's been completely inverted by the worst elements of capitalism.
Well, that's what gets me like so hepped up and hot-headed, is that we can't even get back to Keynesianism.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have to invent the idea of social spending again.
Yes.
like just to get it there. And it's like we've been regressed so far. Our political imagination has been so bonsaied that we're just like we're trapped in this prison that keeps getting smaller and smaller every day. And I'm just like, you guys realize that a universal jobs program was a plank of the Democratic Party in the 70s?
Yeah. So that's the most disgusting part. And I've hammered this to death on Twitter. I would love to have the chance to talk about it with someone on a serious network, but that's never going to happen. But the simple fact is that in 1978, all of the people who won election as Democrats or re-election had endorsed the Democratic agenda. So the entire Democratic House, in a year that the Democrats had a majority in the House, had endorsed a platform to the left of what Bernie Sanders ran on now in 2020. And Bernie Sanders, the socialist, who people are terrified of in Wall Street, is to the right of people who also supported Jimmy Carter for president on what turned out to be a very austerity presidency. He was the one who killed the Democratic agenda and stopped universal health care from passing.
Yeah, Carter really got away clean in the press because he was going to be the person who saved America from itself and was a nice evangelical, but was also just a true believer in neoliberalism and started the whole process because as a Protestant, he believed in austerity because Protestantism is denying yourself pleasure in order to feel pleasure.
Yep. And he appointed Paul Volcker. That was the name I remember before. Paul Volcker, Fed chair, the first of a series of Buchananites. The worst of... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, because it was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Oh my God, I'm nearly 40. And I was just thinking about how
those days.
I was just thinking about how at the same time the World Trade Center was being built, Co-op City was being built. And the two are very much like two sides of a coin of where New York City could have gone. Whereas one is this very kind of municipalist, democratic socialist, free hospitals, free education, largely subsidized housing, public transit, all the stuff we like, which isn't socialism, but is cool.
Yeah.
And the other side is the World Trade Center, which is we need to have office space so that people will buy office space, so there will be more office space, so then we'll build more office space.
Yep.
And it's just like, it's interesting that those two things existed at the same time and were being built at the same time, and both of which were built like shit.
As people found out when they flew planes into one of them.
Well, they flew planes into one of them, but Co-op City, the balconies fell off of them 2 years after they were built.
That's depressing.
But here's the thing, Co-op City, I guess I should define what Co-op City is. Co-op City was this massive public housing project in the Bronx, founded by the New York City unions. It was a municipal bond program to do this. The whole point was working people need to have a place to live. They'll be able to own a cooperative in one of these houses. And they built them, and it's huge. It's I forget the number, but it's tens of thousands of people live in these things.
Yeah.
And as soon as they were finished building and people moved into them, they started to fall apart because the building trades were incredibly corrupt at the time and did a lot of cost cutting. But their response to that was the city's longest rent strike, 13 months.
Yeah.
And they held the state of New York hostage by saying, well, the city owns Co-op City. We're just not going to give it any money.
Mm-hmm.
And they held it hostage for a year until they were able to force it to make the improvements they needed. And now, New York City native, I know people who have hung on to Co-op City apartments their entire lives and given them to their children because, yeah, it may be in the nowhere Bronx, but they're nice apartments and they don't cost any money.
I bet.
Yeah.
It's a shame that wasn't that direction wasn't gone to more widely in more places.
Well, sorry, I was just talking about this. One of the architects of the Reagan campaign had kind of a deathbed conversion, and this is cited in Vietnam and Other American Fantasies. Him talking about specifically what the Reagan campaign wanted to do once they were in power.
Sure.
And they said, specifically, I was in charge of destroying free education.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, if we have a big economic downturn like we had in the 70s, and we have a lot of people going to the University of California system and the City College of New York system, all of which are like free college systems, and people go there like when there isn't enough work, they go back to education. And he said, specifically, we will create an educated proletariat. And if we do that, we're at risk of a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So he made it a priority of the Reagan campaign to make sure no one ever got education for free ever again.
And they succeeded to the point where enough people believe in those Reagan ideas that an ex-Democratic president called all the other Democratic candidates to get them to drop out and endorse the right guy.
Yeah, well, it goes back to Margaret Thatcher when she was asked in 1991 what was her greatest accomplishment, and she said New Labor.
Yeah. So disgusting. And it's just to think.
And the cycle continues, I mean, when people, we were talking about Jimmy Carter earlier. When people ask me, what's going to happen with George Bush's rehabilitation? I say, look at Jimmy Carter. And they say, well, Jimmy Carter's a nice old man. And I go, yeah,
that's what's going to happen.
That's what's happening.
Let's say something important here that I don't think can be said about anybody else. Jimmy Carter has experienced the kind of post-White House conversion that Rutherford B. Hayes and some other people who were really shitty presidents did after, and have given the rest of their lives to things that were so much more worthwhile than anything they did when they were in office. And I understand why they're trying to get redemption, and whether they can get it or not is a whole other topic, because they never did that while they had power, and they only did it after they didn't have power anymore, when they wanted redemption for what they did when they had power. But I mean, Jimmy Carter has experienced a real conversion that no president since him has, too. You don't see Bill Clinton saying, I really shouldn't have ended welfare as we know it. He's still proud of that shit.
That's the reason my mom dropped out of politics, by the way, is because of the welfare thing.
Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of people who used to be the backbone of the liberal Democratic Party that people still pictured in their mind in the 1980s, even though it already didn't exist. But voters who still believed in that really dropped out in large levels after that. It was the reason that Ralph Nader thought he could actually do something by running as a Green in 2000, because of this Clinton disillusionment in the Democrats.
Now, what was this Rutherford B. Hayes thing? I've never heard of that.
No, Rutherford B. Hayes ended Reconstruction, which was possibly the single shittiest thing any president ever did.
Yeah.
Now, Reconstruction was kind of limping along anyway. Bad things were starting to happen, and the government wasn't caring the way it was supposed to. This was the time when the federal government had to double down on Reconstruction and say, no, you can't kill black people. And instead, they pulled all the troops out in order for naming Rutherford B. Hayes president in the House instead of Samuel Tilden, who ironically was an anti-corruption crusader and who despite coming from and came from New York, had fought against corruption all his life, had a better civil rights record in New York City than many Republicans, despite his embrace of not so good things in his national platform. So Rutherford B. Hayes really did a crappy thing to become president. And then his presidency was a single term non-entity that was not worth such a sacrifice. But he spent the rest of his entire life trying to get votes for Black people in the North and Midwest, and not just in the South, which was the sort of hypocritical thing of Reconstruction, is that while angry Northerners were imposing integration and Black democracy on the South as punishment for secession, none of those states were actually extending the vote to Black people in their own states. It was very much a punishment for the Southerners for seceding. And that the saddest moment in Thad Stevens' life happened a few days before he died, when the Pennsylvania state legislature voted down universal manhood suffrage for all male citizens, even if they were Black. And that was one of the last things he learned before he died. And he said that he died a failure. And this is somebody who helped win the Civil War. It was someone who had been fundamental in Reconstruction. And he felt like he died a failure because he hadn't actually changed anything when it came to racism in his own state.
Kind of feels like the dominant mood of America, huh?
It kind of does. And he was someone who read Karl Marx. I'm not pretending the Republicans were perfect. They were incredibly white supremacist when it comes to their handling of the indigenous, particularly. But,
both parties were indigenous people are not people.
But the Republican Party was founded by a bunch of people who had read Marx and thought they knew what he was talking about. Lincoln corresponded with Marx.
Yeah. And the vice president of the Confederacy came to a lot of the same conclusions as Marx, but from the point of view of the slave owners. And this is why we shouldn't have a revolution.
Yes, exactly.
It's also important to remember at this time that, even if you fundamentally disagreed with Marx, you considered him the founder of social science at that time.
Yeah, political economy.
That was not a dispute. It would be like if today, when you were arguing with the PragerU account on Twitter, that account was like, well, I do acknowledge that Marx, had some analysis, and actually approached it like that instead of just being like, socialism is when you don't get enough Christmas present, boo-hoo.
When you read Thorsten Veblen and Emil Durkheim, who are the people who most people would acknowledge founded social science now, if they don't want to give Marx credit, you realize, shit, these guys are Marxists.
Well, the thing that's always the tell for me is that the really psychotic neoliberal economics, your Mount Pillon Society people, is they consider Adam Smith a proto-Marxist.
Yes.
Which, he is, but that's just because, that's what looking at economics realistically does. It kind of makes you Marxist.
And also, again, if you think of Marx as the father of social science, as the creator of it, then, at that time, you could be a Marxist capitalist, right? Because you're using Marxist tools, but you don't agree with the outcome. And so
let's talk about... It was a less... This comes back to Reagan. Because we're talking about neoconservatism. And neoconservatism was founded by ex-Trotskyists who were bringing a very Marxist approach to organizing to the Republican Party. They were the vanguard of thought. They would shape the theory of the Republican Party, and the Republican Party would go out and organize a mass movement that had no idea about the actual theory because they were just doing what the party leaders told them to do.
Yeah, it's fucking wild. It's how Marxism today became Spiked magazine.
You have this totally Leninist model that Republicans have used to impose this nightmare of capitalism that, you know, Marx and Lenin would literally be looking for people to shoot these guys. I mean, we can all agree that that's how Lenin was. Mm-hmm. And Marx would be, I do not recognize what these people are doing with my ideas. And it's just shocking that is the most successful application of Marx or Lenin in American politics, the neoconservatives.
Well, I mean, it does kind of prove the whole history as farce thing. That, like, whenever anything happens in America, it is the funniest thing that can happen.
Oh, of course.
Oh, well, that's
also
true.
This is why there's so much disagreement, even when people all call themselves Marxists, is because if you're actually using the tools of Marx correctly, well, then they're just tools, and there aren't a ton of conclusions in his work. There are a few, but it's a lot more so systems of how to look at things, and that means that there's many, even just still staying within the left, there's a lot of ways to interpret it. You know, that's part of why we don't have like unified leftism right now, is because we don't agree. We think that we agree when we're saying these things, but we're actually not making a meaningful statement of agreement.
Just imagine, and this goes all the way back, just imagine if Trotsky had sat down with Stalin and the two of them had sought synthesis then and there.
Yeah, well,
through the dialect.
What if they just both sat down and said, "We're both Marxists"?
What if they fucked?
Yeah, Trotsky did suck.
So, do we want to talk about...
Let's get back to gig workers, because I did want to talk a little bit about... The article mentioned something that I think is really important, and I want to get back to talking about just delivery workers in general for a minute, because when you used to have a delivery job, every now and again you'll hear these boomers tell these stories about, you can make a lot of money delivering pizzas if you know what you're doing. You know, and you're like, what are you talking about? Because you live in the modern reality and you know how things work in our 2021 capitalist hellscape, never-ending pandemic world, whatever. But the stories that these people are telling aren't entirely untrue in terms of, like, when they were doing those jobs back in the day, some of those jobs were pretty good. And there were a number of things that you were offered as a delivery driver working for a business, like steadily, like a pizza place often, that you don't get at all. Like that, again, this article goes into, like, a warm place to go back to, use the bathroom, sit down, spend time with your other coworkers, eat food, do all these things in like a comfortable place, and safe place, have and just be paid while you're waiting for your next job. Also not be in competition with everybody else there, but rather be a part of a thing, and like a useful, functional part of it that everyone values. And a lot of times, those delivery drivers, if deliveries were too slow, well, they trained you to fold pizza boxes or something else too, and just helped keep you working and made you actually be able to get like full shifts, work 40 hours a week. My dad put himself through college working at a pizza place, he's one of those people.
Yeah, but remember that
community college, to be clear, not fancy.
Elizabeth Warren's mom supported a family on a minimum wage job, but times change.
Exactly. But when you're a gig worker, you don't have that warm place to go back to dry off when the weather sucks, use the bathroom, eat your lunch. You are just either nonstop delivering, and that's ideal, or you're waiting for your next job a lot of times on a park bench, or just on a curb somewhere, just clicking on your phone hoping another job pops up.
And that's what the article again
and
uncurbed.
if you're not from New York City, as I am not, let's make an important distinction between delivering for Grubhub in New York City and delivering for Grubhub everywhere else in the country. Everywhere else in the country, you are probably driving a car. In New York City, you're riding a bike.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was going to say, and if you're waiting for these jobs, you're often having to deal with the fact that we don't have a lot of public infrastructure for waiting, parks, park benches. So all of the stuff that we do to criminalize homeless people is also making it more difficult to be a gig worker.
Yeah. And a lot of these restaurants, even, I mean, some of these restaurant owners also contribute to the problem in their own way by, basically telling these gig delivery workers, we don't want to hardly see you or hear you or know that you exist except for the 1 second this food.
There were one or two places that were really nice to my wife, but they were very rare. And there were more places that were downright mean. Burger King was really vicious to the Grubhub orders for a while. They were giving them to drive-in customers by mistake. So that when the driver got there, they had to wait for them to make it all over again, which is great for the customer. Now they get hot food, but it's not so great for the driver who is losing time that affects the way they make money.
Right.
This is why you always have to be anti-monarchist.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing about anti-monarchism is tough because, yeah, the monarch is going to get you into some silly war. But if the monarch believes that they have a divine right to rule, some of them actually feel like they have to prove it by not sucking.
Well,
Whereas in democracy, they seem to have lost that incentive.
Well, there was that emperor of Mexico who decided he was still emperor of Mexico and went down and tried to help the president. It was really weird.
I know the guy you mean. He is an interesting character. However,
he just felt like it was his job. It was weird. But I also like the I think it was the Austrian king who, when the revolutions of the 1848 came to his door and he asked what all that noise was outside, he said, "The people are making a revolution." And he responded, "Oh, are they allowed to do that?"
Well, and the answer ended up being no. I've read Marx's observations on those revolutions and his history thereof. That's actually Marx's history of those revolutions is actually much more interesting than some of his more famous work.
I will say
Europe was on one.
Mm-hmm.
I will say also, although I am absolutely not a monarchist in any sense, that the transition to modern capitalism was in some ways worse because now there is this unaccountable idea that if you have a bunch of money, that is pure and good and it can't really be questioned. Whereas at least feudal authority could always be questioned to some extent. And I do think it's very bad that we've created somehow an even more unaccountable system than literally a king who could cut your head off.
Now,
so it's clear we're a monarchist podcast now.
We're this is a pro-monarchist podcast.
Well, I mean,
I'm a pro-Stuart.
John Leavitt for king.
So I'm going to tell a story about one of the monarchs who gets a bad rap, and then we'll cut back to gig workers because it's relevant because this is something that gig workers don't have. But there's a story about Frederick the Great that Frederick the Great got into an argument with a guy who owned a horse. And he said, "This is the most beautiful horse I've ever seen. Sell it to me." And the farmer who owned the horse said, No. I need this horse to pull my plow. And the king is, no, this is too good a horse to pull a plow. Sell it to me and you can buy a better horse. No, this is my only horse. If any other horse that I buy will not know my plow or my field as well as this horse, I refuse to sell it and you can't make me. And Frederick the Great is the king of Prussia. So of course he says, well, I'm your king. I can take the horse. I don't have to buy him. I'm offering to pay because I'm a fair king. But if I really want the horse, you can't stop me. And the farmer looked very seriously at the king and said, is there not a court in Berlin? Is there not a right of appeal to Potsdam? By which he was saying he trusted the Prussian courts to deal fairly with him, even against the king. Do we trust our courts like that?
Actually, wait, I'm sorry. Amy Coney Barrett said today that, or whatever her name is, that she's totally trustworthy and that she's impartial in her decisions. So actually, I trust the courts now 100%, because obviously that's a totally believable statement that I should definitely take seriously.
let me say that Amy Coney Barrett was the lawyer whose job was literally to find the exact correct number of votes to win in Florida and then call John Roberts to tell him, I've found exactly the right amount of votes to win. You need to stop the count. That was her whole job after.
Yeah, and Brett Kavanaugh was literally at the Brooks Brothers riot. This is not. Yes. This is just the same people. Although I will say, when it comes to Frederick the Great of Prussia, I'm on his side because I stand gay excellence.
That's reasonable, actually.
That is a very strong argument on Frederick's behalf. He was fighting for gay liberation against a reactionary Europe.
No, he married a woman his parents told him to marry, and then said, I got you a house. It's literally a day's ride away from me. Goodbye.
They made appointments to see each other. It was very sweet and happy and friendly and not at all like a married couple.
Yeah. Well, my personal favorite one of those is there was it was a king in one of the Low Countries. I forget what. They have too many of them in Europe. Consolidate.
They tried that after the Napoleonic Wars, and it turned out.
Yeah, it turns out they all hate each other. I don't know.
It turned out that the Belgians really disliked the Dutch and did not want their king to rule them.
Yeah, but it turns out it was like a rare accident where the king actually really loved his wife, the queen, and like it was an actual love match. But he was obligated to have a royal mistress because that was just the fashion at the time. So one of his provinces was like rebelling and like going to the Spanish or whatever. So he picked a fashionable noble woman from that province, made her the official royal mistress, and she did all like the court and fashion art stuff. But like he never had sex with her because he loved his wife. It's just mistress was a position.
Yeah, no, it was a court position. It was literally a court position in France. There was a royal mistress. I think that's Louis XVI, and it ended badly for him. But Louis XVI had a royal mistress, but was totally in love with Marie Antoinette, and vice versa.
Well, no, like that's the problem. If you're the king of something, never actually be in love with your wife. That causes problems.
That ends badly, yeah. Well,
what do you think? What do you think this is?
There's a very tragic story.
You're just at that point. You're just mixing things up. Okay, marriage isn't supposed to be about love. It's about consolidating your lands.
I got married, and I know what marriage is about.
There's a very tragic story. Tragic story about Frederick the Great's childhood. And if it were in any way true that any trauma could influence someone's orientation in any way, it is very important to remember that from a very young age, Frederick the Great's mother was telling him he had to marry his cousin, Princess Amelia of England. He had to marry her. He had to marry her. She loved him so much she would die if he didn't marry her. And Amelia's mother, who was the Queen of England, was telling her daughter Amelia this exact same story about Frederick the Great. So that these two kids who never actually met each other, except for maybe a few passing times at these sort of odd family reunions in Hanover, these two kids who never really met or knew each other were convinced by their mothers that they were totally in love with one another and would die if they didn't marry, to the point that during the period where their fathers, who hated each other, King George II of England and King Frederick William I of Prussia, they could not stand each other in any way. They could not tolerate each other's presence. They insulted one another left and right. They were not going to let their son and daughter marry each other. It just wasn't going to happen. And they went along with their wives with the one hand, while always plotting to screw it all over with the other. And finally, the King of England just married the princess to someone else, and Frederick had to marry someone else. And there was this whole tragedy where he was going to kill himself. But if trauma could actually influence anything like that, then this guy's mother was just like, both his parents were doing this to him from a young age. He was one of the most abused children ever. I mean, well, like, if you believe he was evil,
didn't his dad kill his boyfriend in front of him?
His dad had his boyfriend or alleged boyfriend, but yes, if his dad had his credibly alleged boyfriend killed in front of him by execution after they tried to run away together.
Yeah, I think that's going to do something to you.
Yes. His parents really fucked him up. And despite that, despite his flaws and foibles and the whole, 15 years of war with a 10-year truce between them. But despite all that, he was the sort of person whose subjects thought the courts would give them a fair shake against.
Well, on that note, I'm just going to very quickly go to the bathroom. When I come back, we can run down labor news. So
definitely. But
yeah,
this is an excellent line. Royals always seem to oppress themselves.
I mean, I think it's important to note that the top figurehead royal was often not like the primary beneficiary of the systems of power necessarily, and was more so a puppet of the people actually getting the most benefit to some extent. So you have to think of it like everyone's seen Game of Thrones. You have a handful of families that basically run the country. Most feudal systems were like that. Okay.
And
go ahead.
Let's be very clear in the fact that most of the people in the books on which Game of Thrones is based are to some extent actually based on people from either Scottish history during the period where all the Scottish clans were plotting against each other and the king, trying to be the new king, or from the Wars of the Roses, which is kind of one of the shittiest periods of British history as far as nobles not being able to trust each other.
And French history.
Yes. But
so you've got like 7 families that just like basically run your country. And there are people within those families that are getting to really run things from behind the scenes and live the good life and basically get what they want. That figurehead is not often one of those people who's actually in the controlling group. They're often like some forlorn cousin from one of the families that they know they could just shove onto the throne and then bully into doing whatever they want.
Well, now
Once again, Game of Thrones, you saw
for most of its history, that was usually not how things worked in Prussia. To be fair.
To be fair, yes.
Frederick the Great's father was a particularly hands-on king who went so far as to plan and order his own kidnappings of prospective elite guard members. He would have tall men from other countries kidnapped so that they could be impressed into his elite bodyguard in Prussia. It was crazy. But Frederick the Great, he definitely ran his country. I mean, you can say what you want about whether he was a good person overall or not. I think it's impossible to have power and be a good person overall. I think there are sympathetic things about his character, but I don't think people with that kind of power can be good.
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Welcome back.
We're just talking about how much feudalism sucks still.
I thought we were a monarchist podcast now.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Remember,
we're pro-monarchist.
So let's remember that the monarchs gained their power because the middle class and the peasants preferred one accountable head that they could personally blame to all those nobles. I mean, Henry VII, for instance, specifically relied on middle class and the equivalent of working class support to keep his nobles in check. Henry VIII even more so. Elizabeth created her own new gentry just to hold off the old nobility.
And a new church.
Yes. Edward mostly created, people around Edward mostly created the new church.
Yeah. So, labor news. Let's get into it, folks. The Nabisco strike is now in its second month, and a really cool thing happened today. Which is that, a contractor who was going to a Nabisco factory in order to repair a roof saw the picket line and slammed right back.
Good for them.
And we're starting to see shortages of Nabisco products on grocery shelves with little signs saying, like, due to industrial progress, there is no more Nabisco products. I'm like, good. Keep on that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good reminder that there's a lot of people that aren't online, folks. I know people forget a lot, but like that guy who was driving to fulfill that contract, he didn't know, or they didn't know, or she didn't know. They didn't know that the job, was for a company where an active strike was going on that they might agree with until they saw it.
That's also why it's important to be very visible and organized outside in reality.
Yes.
Pickets are important because I know a lot. Okay. When I was first organizing with the New York City DSA, one of the things we did was the CSW strike for Verizon shops. We were all encouraged to go to our local Verizon shops and support the pickets in whatever way we can. Provide them with water, whatnot. I did it by providing a picket, and I had two things that were really interesting happen to me. I had a couple, it was an older couple, who saw us picketing and went, "Oh God, we met as a couple in a picket line against Ford Motors." What are you picketing and why? And I explained it hours later. It's like, oh, that's great. Do you guys want to take an hour break? We'll take an hour in the picket. We're like, yeah, cool. And it was that was so cool. What a cool sign of solidarity.
Yeah.
And they did it, and it was fun for them. And the other one was, I was in the CSW picket, and this guy just kind of touched me on the shoulder and said, "Hi, how are you?" And I was like, I'm fine. Do you have a question about the strike or the picket? And he said, like, no, I'm German. Are you part of a political party? And I said, yes, we're part of the Democratic Socialists. And he responded, the Democratic Party? And I said, no, the Democratic Socialists. And he sort of skipped on his butt and said, like, I didn't think you had those in America. So that was fun. But yeah, like very visible solidarity strikes, pickets, Scabby the Rat. They're all good because they remind people this is still going on.
Well, I know people who will tell you left and right why they're not socialists. The Social Democratic Party of Germany is at least explicitly anti-capitalist in their manifesto even today, and the guy who keeps losing to Angela Merkel is significantly to the left of Bernie. And
their part. This was something I was just talking about today. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's like their party is going up in the polls. So is the Norwegian communists. So is the Japanese communists. Like it's this really weird contingent of countries.
One of the people who used to help me promote Medicare for all during the 2020 primaries was a member of the Norwegian Red Party. So when I saw an article about them, I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah, no, like once again, I would like proof that I am 5 years ahead of everyone else. The other major labor news party is Vice has once again laid off 12 people, including 2 expectant mothers who are trying to organize because Vice is shit. Don't buy Vice products.
No, don't click on Vice.
Don't click on Vice. I say this as someone who has been published by Vice. Like, don't click on Vice.
Don't retweet Vice. Don't quote Vice. You can find a better source than Vice for that stuff. It's like the right-wing stuff.
If you want to read John Leavitt's articles in Vice, just DM me. I'll send you some totally legitimate copies. It's all fine.
No, I'm lucky. I was always like so lazy that I only ever had like 2.
A lot of people don't know how much Vice sucks. It's good that we're bringing.
Yeah, no, Vice is a gigantic union buster. Like if you follow Kim Kelly, the labor reporter, Grim Kim, like she was fired by Vice for basically no reason because she was trying to unionize them. They're bad. They're bad.
They are. They were founded by one of the people who went on to found the Proud Boys.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Let's not forget. Let's also not forget, like, their other founder may or may not have credible ties to the CIA.
It's always a bad thing, which is a great way to segue back into people who manage employees by apps, even if a lot of the people aren't true gig workers. Amazon's profitability started when Amazon Web Services started having a product the CIA would buy. And when the CIA started contracting with Amazon Web Services to do shit for them, that's when a bunch of big corporations started contracting with Amazon Web Services.
Every big tech company wants to be a defense contractor.
Yeah.
And once you understand that, everything makes sense.
A cop. When people say they don't want Amazon to have your shit, it's not just a matter of big tech censorship or big tech invasion of privacy. Amazon is a cop. What they know, the government knows. They give this shit to the government.
Yep. And it's important to realize when we say these tech companies want to become defense contractors, that a lot of the modern defense budget is for cyber defense. Like a huge portion of it goes to that now. So, it's not like Google necessarily literally wants to make missiles, although they are, but that's another matter. It's, like just the cyber security contracts for the government alone at this point are billions, trillions of dollars. It's so much money that, that's worth fighting over.
And it's so surreal that you see, if you watch CNN, which I don't, but I'm doing 24-hour home care for someone. So like all they do is watch CNN. There are commercials for AWS on CNN, and I'm just like, why?
No, if you ever want to do a study of why there is a remarkable lack of diversity of message between even Fox News and MSNBC, watch the commercials sometimes. They have all the same sponsors.
No, I used to say, and this like got me in trouble in the Bush era years, because I would say the only reason the Daily Show is able to say what it can say is because Viacom doesn't have any defense contracts. And people got mad at me, and they don't get mad at me now for saying that. So like, I guess that's a change. But also the other big worker news, labor beat is in the Netherlands, in Holland.
Oh yes,
Kennedy, you know this?
Yep. The Dutch court made a decision that Uber drivers are, in fact, employees, not self-employed contractors. And this is a big deal because there have been a few rulings kind of pushing in this direction happening in different places. This actually follows a different ruling in 2017 by a top EU court that, sort of helped build the framework for this case. There is a stack of cards that could fall here, and this is a reassuring sign.
It is a fear of a case like this being inevitable in California that led Uber and the other apps to push through a horrible law that treats gig workers like chattel, and led to supermarkets firing their in-house delivery drivers to contract with the apps instead, and all sorts of garbage.
Yeah,
it's a small step that maybe in retrospect be a big step for recognizing workers' rights, because after all, the only thing tech companies innovate is how to get around labor laws.
Yes, exactly.
And we should note a couple of things about this story. On the positive side, this is a union win, and we should give credit where it's due. The trade unions of the Netherlands were, largely responsible for this in a lot of ways. And, it turns out that if you get a ton of gig workers together and organize them, that's a lot of people in our modern economy, and that's a powerful force.
It is also very much worth noting that while they have had their fair share of corruption scandals too, the Dutch trade unions are in theory still anti-capitalist and are affiliated with a theoretically anti-capitalist Labor Party.
Yeah, we can talk about the many problems with the politics in the Netherlands, but some of their unions are actually still the real deal.
I mean, you can call the Netherlands a not real country that's just a collection of shell corporations for international crime all you want, and I just did. But the on-the-ground, workers' movement of the Low Countries is actually really, really cool, and it's a good model for how we did things.
If
their longshoremen refused to do a shit ton of shots.
The best part is if piracy counts as international crime, and I think it does, because I believe it's actually against international law, then the Netherlands have always been shell corporations for international crime.
Yeah.
It's a long-standing tradition.
What is the Netherlands but a confusing pile of shell corporations?
I will say this, though. This is a victory that, like I said, we need to keep pushing towards that moment that the House of Cards actually topples, because there's been enough of these kinds of victories. Because one of the problems with massive corporations is they flaunt their power a lot. And so Uber has said, we're not changing a damn thing. We're appealing this, which if you were convicted by the court of a crime and you said, I'm not serving my sentence, I'm appealing this, that would not work out for you. So interesting how Uber is able to get away with that. But I mean, well, we'll see if they do ultimately, because the Netherlands could try to, flex. The Dutch government could try to flex on them in some way. But what are the odds? Come on, it's
No.
not
So,
gonna happen.
not just invented Tulip Wall Street, but the original Wall Street is very much based on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. And the New York Stock Exchange, even though it's met in multiple places since then, has existed in some form or another since the Dutch owned the city.
Oh, you mean in New Amsterdam?
Yes. So they
And
didn't just invent Tulip Wall Street, they invented real Wall Street too.
Yeah, if
Although-
you watch the movie National Treasure, an important documentary that everyone should see, it gets into the history of Wall Street being founded by the Dutch.
Okay, do you know why Tulip Mania, like, basically considered the first speculative commodity mania in modern capitalism? Do you know why it stopped?
Because people realized that it was no, that's actually not true. There was it only stopped because of some disaster that wiped out a crop or something like that.
It wasn't that. It preempted that. There was a plague in Amsterdam, and people were too afraid to come to the trading market.
That's right.
And that stopped the momentum, which stopped
the
whole pyramid scheme.
It's too bad Tulip Wall Street didn't have the kinds of folks we have now, because they would have just been lining up to buy the flowers anyway, and then dying of whatever.
Now you can buy the flowers at home.
This is the thing, is that these big tech companies are Tulip Wall Street all over again. This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, where it's a modern day game of musical chairs, where you're hoping that the last person to own the company is when the music stops isn't you.
And what's stupid and horrifying about having this tech bubble is we already had a horrible tech bubble within my lifetime.
We did.
We didn't learn anything.
No, here's a fun fact.
We had two. Because one was in 2001, and we forget about it, and we forget about Enron because 9/11 happened immediately after.
I remember 2001 very well, in the bursting of the tech bubble.
But here's the thing about tech bubble and all that, is that we keep kicking the can.
Yeah.
And we've been kicking the can since 2008. Yes. And every time we kick the can down the line, it makes the results of not kicking the can worse. So we reflexively kick the can, which makes the results of not kicking the can worse. So we reflexively kick the can. So
this is the trouble.
The economic models that I was following before COVID said we would have a fairly massive asset equity crash around October 2018. And that corresponds very well with a lot of liquidity being put into banks via the Fed around that time. Like, we invented $4 trillion to do that. So I don't know when the next liquidity crash is going to... That's a lot of lightning in my window. Okay.
Let's take this moment to point out that $4 trillion being magically pumped into the Fed, or even more fun, when they were pumping in practically $8 trillion a day. I had a discussion when Alan Grayson was on the show before Kennedy joined me. We worked out, for what they were paying per day, they could have been giving each of us $20,000. That's per day now, mind you, not per week or per month or per year. This is what they were dumping into the stock market per day. They could have given every American at least $20,000 every one of those days. In some cases, more.
And it's because America is the only country is one of the few countries where you can actually say money isn't real, because we are the reserve currency of the world and the reserve consumer of the world. So we literally can't produce more money.
And that's why the smartest capitalist economist in America is the person who admits that money is a con game, and we can print as much as we need to for good things and not just for the defense budget.
Yep. Yeah, and then they use this system that, you know, they understand how it works. This is one of the most frustrating things for me, and this might be approaching final thought territory as well.
I'm going to cut this. I am going to cut off for just a moment. No, not Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff is a Marxian economist, and I believe he's actually a Marxist as well. Stephanie Kelton.
Wolff is a good economist, though.
Yes.
Oh, well, definitely. Marxists are usually better economists in that they're not starting completely from fiction. Kelton.
But one of the frustrating parts about all this ties into a lot of what we've talked about tonight, is that these people at the top pretend they don't understand the system that they're running, and then they abuse us with it. And they say things like, oh, the debt, we can't do things because of the debt, knowing that the debt was created so that the reserve could function. And that some of that debt must exist in order for our current model of currency to exist. And that, in fact, if we eliminated the debt, we would not have currency because that is what we've created. Like,
I literally don't think they understand it.
So under the whole original system of money created by Alexander Hamilton, which did not require a gold standard. The gold standard was added later by so-called hard money Democrats under Andrew Jackson as part of his pet bank garbage. But anyway, under Alexander Hamilton, the value of the dollar was specifically preserved by a sinking fund against the debt, which meant that the value of our dollar was based on our ability to pay against our debt, which meant the debt had to exist for us to be able to pay against it.
Yep. And these people pretend that they don't understand it. And I do agree with John that some of them are idiots who really don't know what they're saying. But people like Nancy Pelosi, she's a very rich woman who manages large financial endeavors. She understands how our economy works.
So,
when she does not, she's fucking with you.
I'm sorry, Kennedy. Look, I respectively disagree.
Because I agree with John here, and I'm going to tell you why.
Well, I'll tell you why I do, and then Chris can tell. But I have dealt with very rich boomers in my life, and I'm talking people like who have like scary amounts of money, like life-altering amounts of money. These people have no concept of how money works.
Definitely not.
They think it's like manna from heaven. They think it's it's odd that it happens. Their concept of how money works is like how medieval peasants think God works.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, it is. It's divine. Money is divine enshroudment in our modern society.
And
I
don't
mean that figuratively. I mean that literally.
But one of the mechanical reasons that they don't know what money works is that for them, it literally does go on trees. You know why no one is pressing criminal charges against Trump for his taxes? Because every rich person in the country borrows money they don't pay back from banks. And if we go after Donald Trump for it, we have to go after all of them for it, including really rich people in positions of the U.S. government, like Nancy Pelosi and her husband.
Well, it's a bit like how one of the reasons there weren't a lot of Americans named in the Panama and Paradise Papers is because a lot of the types of fraud detailed in those papers are just legal here. Like
Yeah,
it's very legal
exactly.
to
Very
commit
legal.
tax fraud in the United States.
I-
So much so, I've helped some friends commit tax fraud.
I will say this. I agree with y'all overall, but I will continue to make my point just for the purpose of knowing that amongst all these ignorant people, there are also predators.
Yes,
That know that
I
they are
agree, but
don't-
I think there are
managing
way
people.
fewer of them than you
I'm
think.
going to say
Most people are
something.
dumb.
It's like
I'm
1% of rich people.
I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something cold and dark. Predators do not have to have brains. They just have to have teeth and a big mouth.
I agree with
Sharks
you.
are largely unchanged in 10,000 years.
I
Yeah.
agree with you, but I will make the point that I make simply because I operate in small business and I know how vicious some of these people who do know what they're doing really are, and you really have to be careful.
So-
of those folks.
They're
So-
vicious because it's small.
You don't have to be intelligent to know what you're doing sometimes. I think this has come up before, but there are people who are quote unquote smart in terms of accreditation who are really dumb.
Sure, of course.
When I talk about owning economics PhDs in David Graeber's threads, I'm not joking.
Oh yeah, I agree with you 100%.
These-
I don't even believe in the traditional
David-
model of intelligence at all. Like we have this
Oh.
entire system that tells you this is smart and this is dumb, and it's all, there's a lot of that's joke. You know, you can learn a lot more from talking to an old farmer sometimes who doesn't have a single degree than you can from talking to a PhD who just obviously has never experienced one life thing.
you have people like Sam Harris, whose expertise in their own field can be disputed and who sound like complete fools whenever they try to talk about anything outside their own field.
Yeah.
And
that's
he's
one
not
of the
only one.
illusions of intelligence, is that you're a smart person if you meet certain criteria, and then you're qualified in every area, even if realistically you're actually bad at most things.
And of course, as it has been commented, believing that money is manna from heaven and conveys religious and godly power, billionaires believe they own everything and act that way and are not, on the whole, intelligent people. I think I said this before, is if you want to learn that Bill Gates isn't a genius, listen to him talk for a little while. If you
ever
want
listen
to learn,
to Jeff Bezos talk, it's like talking to drywall.
Oh my God.
If you want to know that Elon Musk is not a genius, listen to him talk for a little while. It's not rocket chemistry, people.
Yeah, people have all these theories about why Mackenzie left Jeff. Just listen to the man talk. Could you put up with that?
Plus, have you seen the picture of him in the cowboy hat?
I would say, have you seen the picture of him eating an iguana? Because I really hate cannibalism.
All right. My final thought for the evening is fairly simple, which is that I think the Netherlands has the right idea, and that gig workers need to be declared employees, need to be guaranteed pay for the time they work, and it needs to be understood that time spent driving around or expected to be riding a bike around waiting for a call is paid time. And until those conditions are met, I don't think the gig worker model is something that should be considered legitimate in this country. Obviously, it's not going to be my perfect world, but hey.
No, it's not a legitimate model. It was created by tech companies in order to exploit labor because there's no other way to make a profit because, well, not to be Marxist, the tendency of the rate of profit is falling. And
Well,
there's
that Marx got that from Proudhon, sorry.
Proudhon, yeah.
That is completely anarchist. Marx adopted it.
Look, I think anarchists are very cute. And I like it. I always say the anarchists keep us honest. And I'll go with that.
And he did the math, and the simple fact is, if everybody who buys something has to sell it for a profit, the person who makes it gets fucked.
Right.
As a matter of math.
Right. And because of that, because we're living in a situation where the people at the top don't know things are wrong. According to them, everything is fine. Like the line keeps going up, but the line keeps going up because we keep squeezing more blood out of a stone. And we do that through like this labor arbitrage. Is that, you know, like, this can't keep going on. We're going to have a stopping point for when people are not willing to, because again, if you read that article in Curbed, risk their lives to deliver a single slice of cake.
That's not the sort of thing that some people are going to feel like is worth doing at some point. I think you're right.
And I know it was from a Voltaire play and not Marie Antoinette, but, you know, let them deliver cake.
Let them deliver cake, indeed.
Brioche.
John, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time, joining us.
Oh, no, this was fun. I got super drunk.
That's just how we roll on this show. Is there anything you want to promote or anything you got going on that you want to plug or anything that's just going on in your city that you think people should know about?
I want to promote the spooky shadow that is me. No, I'm terminally online at Levitt Alone. Also, levitalone.com is where most of my writing and art is. As for things in my city, I don't know of anything right now aside from Be Pro DSA, but also that article in Curbed, I recommend everyone read.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with this delivery step organizing within the city. One thing that like I didn't get to mention is that a lot of them are organizing based on where they were when they emigrated to this country from various villages in Mexico, which are mostly indigenous. So like that's an interesting part of it. Oh my God, ethnic blocks appearing in New York City. How strange. Yeah.
That's never happened before.
That's never happened before. I say this as someone with an O'Sullivan in my family. That's never happened before. And
the divergence of the futures of the Irish and Italian 5 Points gangs was very interesting. Let's just say that.
I am weirdly popular on Irish Twitter, which I find very funny. Because apparently like they want like an American leftist to explain America to them because they're playing footsie with leftism in a very funny way.
I have a bunch of British acquaintances who with whom I am mutual, who appear to be very interested in what's happening. They
want to know that Big Daddy America does it first, so that they can do it. And I'm just like, I get that feeling from Ireland a lot. I'm like, is it okay if we do a socialism? And I'm like, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool and good, actually.
This is why Bernie Sanders was so popular in so many other countries. It was
permission. It was permission.
If they elect Bernie Sanders in the U.S., then we could actually elect someone who's really to his left, because the word socialism in the U.S.
Well, like the wild thing is that like Sinn Féin is now like polling ahead of the other major parties in fucking Northern Ireland.
Hey, my favorite, and then then we'll ask Kennedy about his final thoughts. But my favorite Sinn Féin fact is that Theresa May was relying on Sinn Féin to vote for an open border to save her government. It is the funniest thing. And then these Starmer Labour types and weird liberal types in the UK were again counting on these Sinn Féin MPs to vote to save them. They never vote. That's their thing.
It's like this. There's this widespread. I'm very sorry, Kennedy. We'll get to you. There's this widespread.
Fine, I don't even have much to say. So
no, there's this widespread breakdown in Western advanced capitalistic countries where everyone's just going, I don't know. Fuck it. Are the capitalists right? Are the communists right? Like, I don't know. So like the middle has dropped out of it. And my model for this is my husband, who grew up his entire life under a Labour government, who lived in the North. And, you know, when he was doing all the Bernie Sanders stuff, when I was doing all the Bernie Sanders stuff and I was doing all that stuff, like he would just like, I'd occasionally meet him on the piano because he's that kind of English person. He plays the piano. He asked to play the piano at some of my DSA meetings. It was super cute. Solidarity forever. It's the same line as John Brown's body. And, you know, he would just occasionally mutter something to himself like, you know what? The English communists had some good ideas. And I feel like that muttering, like, you know what? The communists had some good ideas, is kind of happening all over. They're just kind of muttering to themselves.
On the notion of communists in England had some good ideas, can I just say it? National Health Service.
Not even a communist idea.
Well, no. To be fair, while they were,
I will say this:
lapsed. The British Labour Party was a member of the Comintern.
I know that, and on one hand, I'm intellectually, I agree with, you know, we can't call things that are just state spending communist because then prisons are communist and police are communist, and I get that.
So not real communism. So right, I will stipulate from the no real Scotsman rule is correct when it comes to communism. There has never been real communism.
Right.
This was the kind of state capitalism that was very much considered real communism when Clement Attlee pushed the NHS through.
Okay. That's what I agree with. And I agree with from a stance of if people want to think that good things that they like are communist, I'm going to let them think that.
And that's fair. Now, anyway, I know that Kennedy. It's not really communist. I'm an anarchist. I know that real communism is anarchy. So jokes aside, no, of course
anarchy is the state we get to when we get whatever. Anyway, Kennedy, Emperor. How would we get there?
It's all the same. I just want to say, as my final thought, check out that article in Curbed if you can, because especially of what John mentioned that we didn't get to as much, which is the using the model of indigenous organization in Mexico in these New York City situations to help delivery drivers, because that's kind of interesting and definitely a little bit anarchist.
And they are creating safe spaces where they didn't exist before.
Yeah,
and they're creating really cool places where people can like charge batteries and get food. It's like it's very anarchist.
And as I told someone just today, there is in fact, and even if you want to say, well, the CIA helped the Kurds, there is in fact one genuine, successful, ongoing anarchist revolution in Chiapas right now They have been winning for a long time, and the Mexican government has still not gotten rid of them. So when your friendly neighborhood Marxist says that there are no successful anarchist revolutions, please point to the Zapatistas and slap them. Not that we condone real violence.
The Zapatistas are very cool, and it's a hand-in-hand thing. If the anarchists want to say, well, the Zapatistas are proof that there has been one revolution, I can say, like, well, Cuba is a result. There's one revolution. You know what? I don't think we really need to be
Cuba and
in opposition.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
Cuba and Vietnam and China are three legitimate revolutions that happened without the Soviets taking over their governments.
Oh God!
Yeah.
I was just talking to someone about how the Japanese Communist Party is somehow ahead in the polls right now,
Which is great news.
It's great news, and I said they were only allowed to exist because of the wartime government by the U.S.
They were only allowed to exist because General MacArthur, who was very connected to the efforts that successfully made it illegal in the United States, made the Japanese keep communism legal. Yes.
Well, no, it was only allowed to exist because they said you can be a communist party, but you can't have any ties to China or Russia, which turned out to be really good for them 90 years later.
Yes, really good.
Eventually, great. Okay, here's my actual final thought. My actual final thought is that anarchists, we can't have any theory without giving credit to the creator of social science, Marx, and using his tools.
True.
So it's ridiculous to pretend that there's a divide there. Marxists, it's ridiculous to pretend that anarchist critique has not always been a tool of improving Marxism since the very beginning of its creation.
Anarchists keep us honest.
This entire 4-quadrant political compass is bullshit. There is not as much of a divide between us as we think. That's my final thought.
We are one movement. One movement.
To agree with Kennedy, one of the first things the Bolsheviks did on assuming power was they let Kropotkin out of prison. They did not agree with him, and he criticized them viciously for the rest of his life, saying that they were not real communists or socialists, and they let him.
I always say the big thing you get is that the very first thing, one of the first things the Bolsheviks did when they took power was erase all of the sex laws.
Yeah.
And say, it doesn't matter. You can be gay, lesbian, whatever. Doesn't thing. And Stalin re-put that in. And, people always say, when was the revolution stopped? I'm like, I put it there.
Well, when Stalin reinstituted abortion bans in order to make amends with the Russian Orthodox Church, that kind of violated a lot of fundamental principles of Bolshevism at the time.
Yeah.
But it's fun to argue about things that happened literally 100 years ago.
It's true.
So, we'll be relitigating history again next week, as we always do.
Now, of course,
my
real final thought, the one connection between Marxism and anarchists is libertarian Marxism. And who thought up libertarian Marxism? C.L.R. James, a Trotskyist. So maybe Trotsky didn't suck.
The next time John comes on, that's going to be the entire topic. Did Trotsky suck?
That would be a fun show, actually.
Well, I'm done.
And everybody, please have a great night. On behalf of John Leavitt, my partner in crime, Kennedy Cooper, and myself, you can, if you want to pay us, you can pay me at patreon.com, Eclectic Radical. Kennedy, tell them where they can pay you, please.
Honestly, I don't know right now. Come back to me on that next week.
That's fair. That's fair.
I married an Angles. I'm fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, you know how it goes. Everybody have a great night, and we'll tweet at you.